In relation to birth, there are a number of narrative threads to this book. Firstly, the election, as Charles has pointed out, and the immense logistical challenges that the IEC faced in putting together an election of major proportions from scratch in just over 3 months without a voter's roll. They must understand that a voter's roll is one of the critical components of any electoral process, because as we have now, if you have a voter's roll and voters are assigned to a particular voting station, you know that 3,000 voters will pitch up at the clubhouse or at the school or in a rural village to vote. So you know you have 3,500 voting papers and enough ink and etc. to address the needs of those voters. In that election, there was no voter's roll. People had multiple identity documents which they could use to vote. And so one really didn't know whether you'd get 10,000 or in some cases 20,000 people pitching up to a voting station, or 200. So the logistical difficulties in terms of getting the election materials to particular places was a nightmare. Secondly, the book examines in detail the considerable forces that conspired to stop the election. You know, the right wing is written off now, but then the country was on the cusp of conflict, huge conflict. And no one knew exactly what the balance of forces were, particularly in relation to the army and the police. No one knew whether key elements in the police and the army would stay loyal, or whether they would defect to the right wing. And at that time, I must tell you, this was not a bizarre perception, it was fact. Many of the generals in the SADF at that time were sympathetic to the right wing, and many of the retired generals, like Jan Breitenbach, their allegiance had already been declared. And let me take you back. Jan Breitenbach was one of South Africa's most decorated and experienced officers, the founder of one reconnaissance commander, the Elite Special Forces Unit, and later the commander of the feared 32 Battalion, composed of former Angolan FNLA fighters and South African officers. 32 Battalion, or Buffalo Battalion, was the most decorated unit in the South African Defence Force since World War II. Jan Breitenbach was the commander, or one of the commanders, of the right-wing Volksfront forces. So it was a time of apprehension and very real fear.